Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Alright, welcome back everyone. We're here today with Jennifer Heighton, and she is a teacher in the British Columbia school system, and she's here to talk to us today about what's happening in with COVID and other things about what's happening in the BC school systems. Thank you for joining us today, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being willing to talk with us. And we just want to know somewhat about what is it like teaching in the schools with the COVID rules?
It is, I would say it's complicated. You know, it's a completely different way of how we've been teaching before, but we understand this is what needs to happen to keep us all safe, so we definitely have shifted and adjusted to make it work. Mm-hmm. So some of the things we're doing is, the students have to line up. We try to keep them distanced as much as we can, although 2 meters apart, even like if they're lined up outside, we'd stretch them all the way down the field. So it's just not going to happen. And so 1 meter apart is if we're lucky. And then hand washing, lots of that going on. If we have desks, we spread them apart. Some classrooms don't have desks, though. They have tables because we had moved to more of a collaborative learning style. And so some teachers had already gotten rid of the individualized desks. My class does still have individual desks. I used to have them pushed together, but now they are spread apart into rows. But the teachers that have tables or kind of pods, they've had to, it's been harder for them to get to distance the kids when the furniture isn't quite open to distancing. So there's that. And then strategies that we use, like we used to do a lot more collaborative group work, and we can't do that as much with the COVID protocols. You don't want the kids sitting close together and talking to each other. So it's better if it's more distanced type of activities, which can be complicated and not quite as rich a learning style as what we're used to.
Okay. Has this affected grades any, or the students' ability to learn?
Yeah, it's affected the ability to, like, in terms of how much curriculum you can cover. Mm-hmm. It's not, we haven't been able to get through the curriculum quite as quickly this year. And so, but I think the big picture thing that people should take with them is the fact that we are in a global pandemic. And so, if we quite get through them this year, that's just how it works with all the protocols, because we have to take so much more time to do the health check in the morning where we ask them questions, washing their hands several times a day, so making sure that they follow all the protocols has cut into curriculum time. So it has been trickier that way too, that you do your best, but it's been a challenge, I would say. And then I know for high schools, like I teach in elementary, but high schools, they've had it even more challenging because a lot of them switched to a quarter system instead of semester, which semester system, they would have had 4 courses. And if they're not semester, they had 8 courses at a time, like 8 classes. But in the quarter system, there's only 2 classes in a term, and they just do these really short terms of 10 weeks each. So they're doing like a full course in 10 weeks, and only 2 of them. And that was so that there wouldn't be as much mixing of the kids. Mm-hmm. But what What that means, though, is the students have to get the entire course. So imagine the full year of math crammed into 10 weeks. And our full year worth of writing crammed into 10 weeks. It means that the kids have a lot more concepts to cover in that short time.
Right.
And the work getting done, they might have a longer, the whole afternoon to do that course, but it is more challenging. Like, what if they miss a couple of days? What if they're sick or something and they miss a few days or even a week or two because of COVID? Then that's like a good chunk of the course that they've missed, and a lot of concepts. So it has been challenging that way too, curriculum-wise, for both elementary and for secondary.
Yeah. Well, 10 weeks is, as I remember my university days, that was one of the big adjustments in your first year of university, was leaving high school where you had like a whole year or so to pick up a concept. Now you only have like a couple weeks to grab it and be able to test on it and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's I can imagine for say a 14 or 15-year-old to have to jump to that sort of thing. That's got to be a struggle.
It is, definitely, especially when sometimes you're dealing with concepts like for math, for example, grade 10 math. There's a lot of tricky concepts in those upper grades, and just even missing a couple of those classes can, especially when it's the entire afternoon, can be daunting.
Yeah.
To try to catch up on. Yes.
So, you said that you were using in the elementary school, using a more collaborative way of learning. I assume that means more discussions and more group activities. But you're saying you had to veer away from that in your own classroom.
Yes, and if I've managed to do some of them outside. So you do the teaching inside, and then sometimes they can take it outside to do it, but that's very weather dependent, which means that in the wintertime, in the fall and winter when it got rainier, I couldn't do it as much. I'm hoping that with better weather, we'll be able to do a little bit more outside, but then, there's other kids playing on the playground, which is distracting and things like that.
Yeah.
It's not always ideal. When the health officer says, "Oh, just teach outside," they're not imagining that in a school with 14 divisions, like 14 classes, you can't all take them outside at the same time. There's limited places out there that you can take them without being distracted. And you can't all be like, doing a lesson at the same time outside.
I imagine this is like, and that it becomes quite literal. Oh, look, teacher, squirrel.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like it doesn't necessarily have to be, say, Bobby climbing over the jumping gym. It could be literally a squirrel just ran through the middle between you and the students, and it's like, oh, look, now I'm going to pay attention to the squirrel. How do you get their attention back once they've been distracted?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And when you're outside and there's several classes out there, or there's cars coming down the street, or whichever, it is a bit more distracting than when you're in the classroom. However, we are going to, just do the best we can. It's just, when the powers that be think, oh, they can just take them outside. There's a lot more to it than that. I don't think they really think about the realities of it.
Yeah.
And in an elementary school, it can be a little bit easier in terms of the outside part, because there's a lot of rich things you can do when you're outdoors. But let's say if you are teaching secondary history, or writing, composition, it's you're not going to be able to do as much outside as you can inside. So
Yeah.
A science class could go outside, but
Yeah, I was going to say a science class. It probably lends itself to, hey, let's look at what the bugs are doing or how the plants are growing or something like that, and you can have them be, or the squirrel running through. Then it becomes a exciting idea. What about the squirrel, right? But there's other subjects that it doesn't lend itself as easily to.
Yeah. There, and in elementary, there's a lot of things like that you could work with. Whereas in high school, the curriculum for science, for example, is quite structured. So not all activities will lend to being able to be done outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now with the COVID protocol, go ahead.
No, go ahead. With the COVID protocol, yeah.
Yeah, COVID protocols, it varies between school to school, right, in terms of what the state of the building is, for example. So I've been lucky in that the school that I work at, I can open the windows and we can get pretty good airflow going. But there are other schools around the province where the windows don't open, and so those students and teachers are in these classrooms where nobody is distanced, because when you give that occupancy rate of up to 30 students plus a teacher, it's far exceeded what an actual, like even a store would be inside. So like a clothing store, for example, would not be allowed to have that many people packed into it and the same square footage as a classroom does. So ventilation, I think, is super important, and that is something that has not been dealt with much at all, with the ministry making sure that any classroom without windows has something instead, like an air cleaner, a portable air cleaner, or those kinds of things. Some schools, they've been able to upgrade their HEPA filters systems in their HVAC systems, but not all HVAC systems can take a MERV 13 filter. A lot of the older ones can't. The highest they might get is maybe a MERV 8 or something a little bit higher, but not 13. So, for schools like mine where I can open the windows and at least have control over my ventilation, that is good. But ones that don't have as much control or can't open windows, those are the rooms that I would worry about. And I really think it should be addressed. Yeah.
Ventilation is something that has been talked about. Dr. Tedros and Dr. Ryan and Dr. Kirchhoff of the WHO right from there have said that the schools need to be ventilated somehow or another. And as you said, the simplest way is to open a window, right? But is that something that trying to understand the school system itself, is that something that has to come from the ministry, or is that something that comes from the school district? Because there's so many different parts that bring together a school.
That's true. There are. You're right. So who's responsible for what is a big issue that we've been having to navigate, I would say. I would say that the government, which is the ministry, is responsible for setting, the guidelines, and then the districts are responsible for carrying them out. Now, the issue, though, is that BC public education has been underfunded for almost 20 years now. The budgets have been slashed ever since Christy Clark came in and kind of started whittling away at the budget, and the NDP who's come in after them haven't really increased it by that much. So we're still about $1,800 behind the national average per child than the rest of Canada. So that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But for a school like mine, it like $600,000 a year that the school is shortchanged compared to students in other provinces like Alberta or Ontario. So $1,800, so $600,000, over $500,000. Like, how many extra teachers would that pay for, which would mean smaller classes or extra help, like more counseling time or library time or learning support time. That really makes a difference. And so because it's been shortchanged for so long, there's been a lot of areas that districts have been forced to cut budgets in. So some of it's been maintenance, right? So in terms of how the building operates, they've done the best with what they've been given. And so, but the thing is, it's been 20 years of stringent budgets, and so that adds up. So then when you have a pandemic like this, all of a sudden, boom, there are classes, like I said, that have poor ventilation, and that's never been addressed, and all of a sudden now it's important. And this is where the ministry, at the beginning of this pandemic, or even this summer, should have set aside extra money to deal with that. Should have said, we're going to give districts like more than just the basics that they gave. So they gave $45.6 million to districts for pandemic costs. Now, you would think that that's a lot of money, but when you also think that there's 500,000 children going to school that are school-aged, 550,000 to be exact, then that $45.6 million actually doesn't stretch very far, especially because we had to hire daytime custodians, because that was another thing that over the 20 years got cut over the years. A lot of schools had lost some daytime custodians, and now that more cleaning had to happen, they had to hire more. So a good bunch of that $45.6 million that the government gave for pandemic costs went towards that, and there was none left for ventilation. I mean, some districts managed to scrape some together and put in a few more MERV 13 filters and that kind of thing, but it's not really, there wasn't enough. There wasn't enough funding, and that's key, and that is a government responsibility. Like, I don't think the districts were given enough to work with. They're doing what they can with what they were given, but it definitely could have been better. What the government gave, yes. Especially considering our starting point. We were starting with 20 years of underfunded buildings and staffing, and then all of a sudden, boom, pandemic, and now you need more cleaning, you need more this, you need more that, and there's not enough in the budget to deal with all that.
Well, I would think that that we're talking, what is it, 14 million, right? That would just be a good start in upgrading you to bringing you towards the 20 years that you were already behind. That would just be a good start to that. And now you're talking about it would be an emergency thing. There's no way that would cover it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No. And because the school system, I mean, when you think about it, schools, they are educating an entire generation. Like, we're servicing an entire generation of the population, 5 days a week, 10 months a year. So, you think of, okay, other public services that are out there, let's say in the medical community, for example, you only see your doctor like a couple times a year, your dentist a few times a year, and not for an entire day. So, but whereas the school system is it is a huge expense, but I would say it's an investment because you're servicing an entire generation of kids to be hopefully contributing citizens of society.
Yeah.
And so putting the money in is worth it in the long run. And so I just think the nickel and diming that goes on when it comes to education is pretty bad, especially considering other provinces are spending more on their students than BC does.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, and I think that people, especially some of the government officials, I remember, now I'm going to age myself a little bit here, I remember when I was in elementary school, the computer was attached to this huge mainframe thing, and it would never be in a school, to where when I left high school, they had the very first home computers sitting where the school was able to buy a handful of these home computers, and to what we have today. It was all about investment. We wouldn't be where we are today with technology if there wasn't investment into the educational system. And to let it lag behind, what are we actually going to? What could our students of today be doing tomorrow to make a better world for us? Right?
Yeah.
It really is that simple, isn't it?
It is. Very much so. I mean, all of these children are going to be our future lawyers, doctors, nurses, dentists, accountants. We're going to be working in all aspects of society, and so why not develop them to the best potential that they can reach? I think that those years from K to 12 are really important, and I think public education as a whole is something that government should not be looking at as an expense, but more as an investment. And in the last 20 years, that attitude has been more like it's an expense, and that has to change, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're a wonderful teacher, and I wish my kids would have had you. You have some brilliant ideas, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you. And thank you for feeling comfortable and coming on to our show and our podcast to talk about what's actually going on with the schools. Because you said more than what is just happening with the pandemic. You've actually addressed some long-term things that maybe as a society we need to look at with our public school system.
I would hope so. Yes, yeah. I definitely hope so.
So again, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for listening to our teacher from the BC school system. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.